So that's tomorrow night, Wednesday, the February 7th, 6:30 p.m. in 105 Northgate, which is a very nice room. I sent you so many announcements. I hope you got them. And let me suggest that if you are auditing or for some reason you're not getting CourseWeb announcements, please send me your email, and I can add it to the CC list and make sure that you get some of these things. Okay? And Michael, could I speak to you just for a second right after class? Yeah. Okay. So of all the people who are coming to speak here, I wanted to say in general, I gave you this list of the 4 speakers who were lined up, and we probably will have more of them. A very fortunate thing seems to be happening such that they'll be coming here right after being out there in the field. Like when David Hartsoe, for example, wanted to talk about Nonviolent Peace Force, their main project, our main project, I'm actually part of that organization, is in Sri Lanka right now, and David is going to Sri Lanka next week and will be there for 2 weeks before he comes back and talks to us. So these are people who come in right off the front lines, and in that connection, the end of the month, I think Wednesday, February 28th, there's going to be a presentation by 2 people who are participating in one of the most intense, I don't know exactly what word to use here, but this is a situation where the rubber is really meeting the road. Where the Israeli government wants to build this famous separation wall of theirs right through this town. It's going to destroy this little village called Bilin, and people have been nonviolently blocking that construction day after day after day for more than a year. I think it's like 18 months, maybe 2 years. And 2 people, man and woman, one from Bilin and one from Hebron, which is, if there's any place more violent than Bilin, it's Hebron. They're actually going to be here on campus Wednesday the 28th. I asked them if they could come to our class, and they can't. I threatened to go on a hunger strike. They said they didn't care. I'm not kidding about that part. But they did say that what they would like to do is get together with us before the talk. So the talk is at 7. We could have some kind of reception with them at 5. So in principle, just so I can get back to them, how many of you would be interested in getting together with these people, say some kind of reception at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, February 28th? Okay. Why am I not surprised? Okay, great. I'll pass that on. Very good. Well, just to recap a little bit what we were doing last time, we had just started discussing a very interesting point, which is intervention, how to do it, what are the problems to avoid, and how do those problems intersect with basic nonviolent principles. And I want to back up a step on that. Remember, we were talking about peace and imperialism being one extreme, where you go in and say, okay, you people can't control yourselves, but we have peace, here it is, and you ignore all of their indigenous traditions and their advantages and disadvantages. That's very much underappreciated, and there are cases on record of interventions that were attempted and ended up being more harm than good, and one of them was in the Balkans, as a matter of fact, during the breakup of Yugoslavia. The other extreme is to ignore them, and then they basically don't thrive. They collapse. And so you have things like the uprisings in Pakistan in 1972. They got no support from the international community. They went nowhere. Now, this is one of those places where PAX 164B is a little different from PAX 164A, right? Because PAX 164A, we talk about the theory, and everything is squeaky clean in PAX 164A. PAX 164A, you never tell a lie, except the professor, he lies all the time. And you rely totally on person power, and you're not even interested in numbers. So 1942, Gandhi wants to still have satyagraha, but he doesn't want to embarrass the British. Because remember the principle of non-embarrassment. They're slightly preoccupied fighting World War II. They get very excited about that sort of thing. And so there's no point in carrying on a satyagraha with them, but on the other hand, he doesn't want to lose the momentum. He appoints one person to be a satyagrahi. So, gosh, that was very interesting, but I'm sort of forgetting the connection. Why was I talking about this? You better shut down the cameras for a couple. No, I'm only kidding. Yeah, the principle of non-embarrassment connects up with the question of appropriate intervention. The other principle that comes up in this connection, which I'm surprised I forgot to mention on Thursday, is a very important Gandhian principle called Swadeshi. And does somebody want to define for us very quickly what Swadeshi means? Yeah, Zoe? Yeah, very good. So you should solve problems that are closer to you before you go on and try to intervene in problems that are at a distance. And this has even a psychological interpretation where you should try to overcome your own difficulties and work with your own strengths before you reach out to other people. Now, before is sometimes not to be taken too literally, but there is a balance that we have to strike between strict Swadeshi and what the French call the droit d'ingérence, or the right to intervene in cases when human rights violations reach a certain level. All humanity is involved. So if we stand around while stuff is going on in Darfur or Rwanda or the Balkans and have nothing to do with it, that is, from a Gandhian perspective, an act of cowardice, which is basically the most extreme form of violence. So there's actually an imperative. I'm not using the term moral, but there's an imperative to intervene in some cases. But what does that do to the concept of Swadeshi, where the people on the ground are supposed to be doing this themselves? So again, hang on one second, Zoe. Again, we see that the ideal, you never tell a lie, you only need one person, you never intervene, do it all yourself. That's, sort of the Euclidean ideal that we're striving for. But in the real world, there are compromises that we have to make to continue. So Zoe, what was your question? What was? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, this came up in the context of third-party intervention, and the word to intervene is ingérer in French, and ingérence is intervention. And some French internationalists coined this concept, droit d'ingérence, which means the right to intervene. So we're going to have to get back to this when we talk about globalization and globalism, because the whole idea that's involved here is the breakup of the nation-state entity with its absolute sovereignty. So again, the idea is if you have something going on like Rwanda, just to take an obvious extreme case, people are being massacred, and because you are a human being, you cannot stand beside and say, this doesn't involve me. Right? If a failure of justice anywhere is injustice anywhere is a damage of justice everywhere, as Martin Luther King said. So you want to intervene. So let's say the Hutu Interahamwe militia stands there and says, this is our country, you have no right to invade us. But this principle said that you actually cannot prevent a third party from intervening just because of national sovereignty if your own national sovereignty has broken down to the point where you cannot protect the basic life of people in your state. So it's an extremely interesting principle which they're trying to get past. And I happen to know that there's a large group working on this internationally where they're trying to create what they're calling a non-ignorable consensus, that when state control breaks down too badly, You cannot ask other people not to come in and fix it. Yeah. Droit d'ingérence means the right of intervention. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I came in here this morning feeling the way I usually feel in the 13th week of the semester, which is, oh, how are we going to get all this covered? And now matters have gotten even worse. But that's all right, as long as they're interesting. Okay. So we were talking about this very delicate, sometimes balance, where you have to go in and provide, at the very least, some kind of solidarity and witnessing, and possibly even direct intervention going on up the scale to reaching a point, what we call interposition, where you stand between two armies and say, we're not going to let you do this. And you have seen, in a funny way, an example of this, although it wasn't international. Remember, where have you seen third-party nonviolent interposition happening in a very dramatic way? I'll give you a hint. It was in the documentary that we just saw, where it was Satred. Yeah, you did? Right. That was the famous EDSA rebellion. EDSA being the acronym of a street intersection in Manila. It's extremely interesting because you had two sections of the armed forces, one which had defected and one which was loyal to, quote, President, unquote, Marcos. And they were about to have at one another, and people, just men, women, and children, with a lot of religious, prominently, people baking bread, handing out coffee and stuff, they got in between those two forces. So Marcos is sending soldiers against these people in this camp, Camp Baker, I forget what the name of the camp was, and the people prevented them from doing that. And that's why you had that very dramatic interchange where somebody on the street asks someone up in an armored troop carrier what's happening, and he said, my commander will tell you. I'm not sure you heard all this because the soundtrack was not too great. The commander leans down and he said, what's happening? He says, the war is over. And so when you hear the war is over, what's your next question? You come from a win-lose culture. Naturally, you're going to say, who won? And he said, the Philippine people. So that gives us the whole concept of people power being above this factioning into forces. In many of the events that we'll be looking at, there's like an iconic story, which is perhaps a helpful way to remember and encapsulate the meaning of the event. And the iconic story for EDSA was when a fighter pilot was sent out to bomb the intersection where the people were assembling. And you read about 90% of the story is in Zunez, Kurtz, and Asher. This pilot goes out there and he levels off. It shows you why being able to see your enemy, your victims, at least in a bomb site is better than sitting in front of a computer terminal and pushing buttons, which is why the military wants to go more and more to computer terminals. But here's this pilot. He levels out to, I don't know, fire his rockets or whatever he's going to fire, and he looks down and he sees the EDSA intersection. And of course, being Filipino, he's a devout Christian, and he sees it's like this huge cross made up of people. And he said, I went into such a state of shock that I could feel the helmet moving back on my head from the hair, standing up on the back of his neck. And he turned the plane around and landed it and turned himself over to the revolutionary forces. So that is a very good example of the power of nonviolence, and from my point of view, it's a very good example of correct use of symbols. I'm kind of in some ways, I'm the least popular person in the entire nonviolent movement, and that's because I really don't believe in symbols, symbolic action. And we could talk more about my reasons for this. You put me on sodium amytal or something, get me to really divulge. I was beaten up by a symbol when I was in high school or something like that, whatever my problem is. But a little bit more serious, it has to do with the fact that the strength of nonviolence comes from its contact with reality, not from symbols. Anyway, this was a very powerful symbol. But why, some of you may have heard me say this, and some of you maybe can guess, why does it not bother me? Why, here you have Nagler, who's this famous symbol Nazi who hates symbolism. Why is it that he likes this particular episode? Yeah, Alex. Yes. Yes, it was a concrete act with symbolic resonance rather than a symbolic act with no concrete backing. And what proves it in this case was they did not know that they were in the shape of a cross. It was not like with the people who do these calendars who are called the Bare Truth or something like that, where they have people in a rather unusual state of dress lying down spelling out peace and things like this. But these people did not know. They were not consciously aware that they were using it. Go for the reality and the symbol will take care of itself. It doesn't mean you pay absolutely no attention to symbols, but it's better not to get hung up on them. Okay, so that was where we were at last time, and I kind of expanded on that a little bit. Before I get back into our readings in some of these episodes, there were a few things that I noticed over the weekend that I wanted to share with you. Want to share with you is a euphemism. Whenever something bothers me, I have no way to get it off my chest. I use you people. I hope you don't mind. It's a very valuable service you're providing. But one thing that struck me was there seems to be a debate going on in Congress right now. It's not the only debate. The central debate is about how many more troops to give President Bush. How big of a surge are we going to have? I was forcibly reminded of a book by a really brilliant political scientist by the name of Stroessner, something like that, who wrote a book called Why People Go to War. And he looked at the Japanese decision to Stessinger. Thank you, Gary. John Stessinger. It is a brilliant book, don't you agree? And he talks about how the Japanese decided to attack Pearl Harbor. They had a cabinet meeting, and even though there was an emperor, he had a cabinet, and they met. And at this cabinet meeting, the non-war faction said, we have been bogged down in China for 3.5 years. How do you expect us to conquer the United States? They were furious. The meeting was adjourned. The meeting was reconvened about a month later, and the agenda for the new meeting was, should we do it on December 7th or December 21st? Something like that. So this is a funny way that people manipulate their own consciousness when they've made a bad decision, which they cannot justify. Instead of saying, okay, we made a bad decision, let's just go along with it, or something honest like that, they get buried in the details, and they cannot back up again and see the big picture and really face what they've considered. So I know that you've heard me say several times that I have certain disagreements with the way political science is taught as a discipline, but here's a case where if everybody in the country would read Why Nations Go to War by John Stessinger, we would maybe be much better off in Congress right now. One more that I want to quote, share with you, and thank you very much. This is very therapeutic for me. In Gaza, you're having an incipient third-party interposition movement being talked about. That's because these two factions, Hamas and Fatah, are at one another's throats, and obviously the Palestinians are very unhappy with this because their whole thing has been that they're united against the occupation and now they're fighting one another. It's clearly the obvious way to lose. So it has been proposed that ordinary citizens should surround Abu Mazen's house and your Fatah offices and things like that, so that fighters from the other side can't attack them. And I have no problem with this, but I do have a problem with the terminology because these people are being referred to as human shields. And first of all, again, thank you for letting me vent here for a while. First of all, I think this term is dehumanizing, and I don't like it to start with. A human being is not a shield. A shield is supposed to protect a human being, not the other way around. Second of all, and more concretely, the reason I really dislike this term is that it's used of two different groups of people, which, from the nonviolent point of view, are as different as black and white. And that, again, confuses our whole project here. Here we are. You're coming here twice a week, trying to catch up with the reading. I know it's very difficult. I'm going to be thinking about how to help you out there. Working so hard to get this message clear, and journalists out there are using the term human shields for people like citizens of Gaza who may end up doing this, maybe they're doing it right now, and people who are forced at gunpoint to interpose themselves in front of an armed unit. This is a practice which has been carried on here and there. When armies get desperate, they grab hold of children or women or something like that. You know, professors, somebody who's really helpless and vulnerable, and they put them out in front and force them to be there and say, if you shoot, haha, you're going to have to shoot these people. So now do you see why I'm saying that these two things, though they seem similar, are polar opposites, and it's a very bad idea to confuse, overlook the distinction? Anybody help me out here? Why was I so upset about this? Catherine? Voluntarily. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So from the point of view of the world, as to say people who don't take PAX 164, unfortunately still in the majority, the important thing is behavior. And because you're standing there in between two people, camps of people who have guns, you're doing the same thing. Whereas from our point of view, the important thing is volition, and a word that's more frequently used, intention. Real third-party nonviolent interveners are saying, we're not for this side or that side, we're for peace. We are here representing that higher order unity which you people are obscuring with your polar factionalism. Whereas human shields are just human beings being used as objects against their will. So I'm sort of getting into contest mode. I had the idea recently that we should have a world flag and a contest to come up with a better term than nonviolence. Maybe you should get involved in that, Jenna. Tara, you do the flag. Jenna, you do the word. And maybe we should have a contest to think of a term that would first of all be less dehumanizing, and second of all, which would show us the difference between people who volunteer for peace and people who are forced to act as targets in war. But at the very least, you can see why there isn't a whole lot of understanding about nonviolence out there. It's because people don't even have a vocabulary to describe it. Okay? Yes, Station. Actually, yeah, that's a good. I don't actually think that the wrong kind of human shields where people are forced to do it has actually happened in the Mideast. It's happened elsewhere. Can't think of an example offhand, but there were several conflicts recently in which civilians were forced, or it gets to be a kind of a blurry line. Sometimes you have people, go like, oh, I remember in Iraq, the Iraqi army, or in here's the example I was really trying to think of, Lebanon, where you had Hezbollah, which is very similar to Hamas in a way because they do civil service for people who have no infrastructure. But then they also use violence against the external aggressor. So you had Hezbollah going and setting up bases in apartment houses. So in order for the Israelis to take them out, they had to blow up that apartment house, kill 300 people, which unfortunately they actually went and did it. So that's complicating stuff. But I don't think it's actually happening yet in either case, in either definition, in Gaza. All right. Well, time is hemorrhaging. I got to get on to some of the things we've been studying. As I told you in my second and more frantic course web announcement, I do want to talk a little bit about Section 2 in Zuna, Skurz, and Asher before we go on to the Europe part. And again, what I'm doing here is a little bit arbitrary in the sense that I'm talking about only the insurrectionary movements, and there are some movements which start out as anti-militarist reforms or some kind of other less ambitious reform, and they discover that this isn't going to go away unless we overthrow the whole regime. And you could argue that the example, the big paradigm that we always think of, the freedom struggle in India, the biggest and best of everything in our field, that was like that. That Gandhi started out asking for the rights of Indian workers in South Africa, and eventually he got to quit India. So get out of here. We have to bring down the whole regime. And it would be very interesting to know. I would actually give up something that I treasure, not necessarily money, but something more affordable, to know when it dawned on Gandhi that he was really going against the British Raj, not to mention Western civilization, colonialism, and all that stuff. It'd be interesting to know. So my distinction here is a little bit arbitrary, but for the time being, for simplicity's sake, we're sticking with uprisings that aim at overthrows of regimes. And I want to say a little bit about the Iranian Revolution, 1978. It's interesting that both Iran and Chile are attempts to overthrow regimes which our country had put in power. In the case of Iran, it was 1953. British and American and Israeli intelligence cooperated the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, who was a very popular leader, and put the Shah in power, who actually was not a Shah. I mean, if you did the DNA, I'm sure you could prove that he was not a descendant of Cyrus the Great, whoever he claimed to be, but he was just a strongman, and he set up, again, with the cooperation of Israeli intelligence. Almost makes you think there might be a law of karma in the universe, considering how grave a danger to Israel Iran is now. But with the help of Mossad, they set up this Savak, and they carried out this horrendous